One of the greatest warriors in the history of Islam, Hazrat Khalid ibn al-Walid, may Allah be pleased with him, whose open sword forced him to kneel before the then superpower of the world, the Persian Roman Empire, could change the situation and outcome of the war at any moment with his presence on the battlefield. Military prudence, strategy, strength, courage, speed, and agility combined, he was an invincible warrior. The Messenger of Allah himself gave him the title Saifullah, meaning the sword of Allah. We are continuously presenting the life story of the great warrior Khalid according to the book Suit of Allah written by the renowned military researcher A.I. Akram of Pakistan. You can find their links in the desk of this post. Before watching this video, it is requested to watch the previous videos. Even after returning to Mecca, the events of many battles occupied Khalid's thoughts for several days. He kept thinking again and again about what a strange 1 o'clock opportunity had appeared before him when the Muslim archers abandoned their positions. And how quickly and skillfully would Shweta use all that? The army was led by Khalid in later times. Such counterattacks were carried out in the war. But the courage and endurance of the Muslims deeply moved him. It seemed extraordinary to him how a small army, attacked from all sides by enemies many times stronger, could fight for their leader and faith with determination like a mountain until the last moment. The Muslims were also the people of the Quraysh and other Arab tribes. Perhaps the new faith of Islam had inspired in them a strength that no other faith could. Perhaps there was such a charm in the personality of Muhammad that Khalid, who was absent from other leaders, had such thoughts in his heart. But he had not yet shown any weakness towards the new faith. He began to think of facing the Muslims again, but not with the deep bitterness and hatred as before. As a player naturally thinks about his next competition, he began to think about the next battle with such Muslims. Khalid, naturally, continued to lead a good life with bravery and courage. For the next 2 years, there was no direct conflict between the Muslims and the Quraysh. Of course, during this period, a cruel and heartbreaking incident occurred at a place called Al-Razi, which soured relations between Mecca and Medina. This incident took place in July 6, 25 AD. One day, some people came to the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and introduced themselves as representatives of their tribe and expressed their desire to embrace Islam. And they were able to explain the Quran and the Islamic way of life. They requested him to accompany them so that they could present the true faith of Islam to their tribe. The messenger, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, selected 6 of his companions for this task. The selected people left Medina with the delegation with a proud heart after getting the opportunity to preach Islam. When the group reached a place called Al-Razi near Uthman, 100 warriors of the inviting tribe who were lying in wait were suddenly attacked. They had no idea about the conspiracy at the beginning of the journey. They unsheathed their swords. But the attackers failed to create any resistance. 3 of them were killed there, and the remaining 3 were taken prisoner and started on their journey to Mecca. On the way, one Muslim managed to free himself and attacked the treacherous enemies alone, but he was martyred within a short time. In the end, the 2 Muslims who were taken captive to Mecca were Hubayb bin Adi, may Allah be pleased with him, and Zayd bin Udasin, may Allah be pleased with them. Both of them had killed the infidels in the previous battle. The relatives of these slain men eagerly planned to buy them at a high price and take revenge. The incident took place during the holy month of Safar. Therefore, no torture was inflicted on the prisoners until the end of the month of Safar. As soon as the journey was over, they were taken to a place called Tanim, northwest of Mecca. There, all the inhabitants of the city, including slaves, women and children, had gathered from the east. The prisoners were taken to 2 wooden poles in the middle of the field. They were given the opportunity to pray for the last time if they wanted to. When the prayer was over, the prisoners were tied tightly to the poles. Both of them were given the option of returning to the life of idle technology or accepting death. They both chose the path of death. Then Abu Sufyan appeared before both prisoners and proposed, "Don't you want to stay safe in your home? And let Muhammad be taken prisoner and come here in your place." They both immediately rejected the offer without hesitation, saying that no punishment on earth could give them a moment's space to think such a thought. Abu Sufyan, annoyed and angry, returned and remarked to his companions, "I have never seen a people love their leaders so much." As Muhammad's followers loved him, the first of the 2 prisoners died. Zayd, may Allah be pleased with him, A slave threw a spear at his chest, and he fell to his death in a short time. Then came Qubay's turn. The scene of his killing became a spectacle. In fact, the people of Mecca had gathered here to enjoy this spectacle. At the same signal, 40 boys ran to Qubayb, who was tied to a pole, with their spears, and they continued to pierce him with their spears. Sometimes they moved away from Qubayb. Then they raised a spear and advanced towards him as if to kill him immediately. But they restrained Qubayb and struck him lightly at the last moment, so that only the skin of his body was cut and pierced. And the stream of blood flowing from the 100 wounds stained Qubayb's body. He would squirm with each blow, but not a single word came out of his mouth. The cruel spectators, seeing his plight, they became happy. After some time, an old man with a spear in his hand went to Lahul, which was very expensive, and drove the boys away. Perhaps by now, these boys and the spectators had also grown tired of this funny game. The man raised his spear and struck him in the chest with great care. As a result, all his suffering ended. They left the two bodies tied to that pole. They reached there. The person who organized the whole thing was none other than Ikram, the son of Abu Jahl. He taught those boys this funny game. Ikram taught the boys in the battles of Badr and Uhud. The crime of killing Muslims may have been forgivable, but by organizing this gruesome display, he was considered unforgivable. From that day on, Ikrama was considered a war criminal. It is worth noting that after many battles, Abu Sufyan had challenged the Muslim army to fight again the following year in the desert of Bandar, and the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, accepted it. According to Abu Sufyan's challenge, this clash was to take place in March 6, 26 AD. When the month of March arrived, Abu Sufyan began to show indifference towards the war for various reasons. As the rainfall was low during the winter, as soon as the winter passed, the temperature rose abnormally. The weather became very hot and dry, and all the possibilities of a bad year began to be observed. Abu Sufyan decided to cancel the possible battle in the desert of Bandar, and Medina sent a spy to spread rumors that the whole country was preparing for a war with a larger army than theirs. His intention was to frighten the Muslims so that they would not leave Medina and advance for war. But when the news of the Quraysh's preparations reached Medina, the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, announced, "If necessary, I will go alone. However, the infidels will be confronted at a certain time." At the end of March, the Muslim army left Medina, numbering 1,500. Of these, 50 were cavalrymen. 600 of this army landed in the desert of Bandar on April 4, 26 AD, but there was no sign of any state there. Abu Sufyan, upon receiving news of the departure of the Muslim army from Medina, gathered the Quraysh and left Mecca, forming the Quraysh army. They were accompanied by strong and brave warriors like Khalid and Sushak. After reaching the position, Abu Sufyan decided to avoid the battle at all costs. He told his men that the current year was too dangerous to engage in war. On the one hand, there was a drought, and on the other hand, there was an unheard of heat, so it was not advisable to engage in war in this situation. "We will wait for next year." Explaining the reason for not fighting, he ordered them to return to Mecca. Ikrama and Safwan strongly opposed this decision, but no one paid any attention to it. All the Quraysh returned to Mecca. The Muslim army stayed in the desert of Bandar for 8 days, and when they received the news that Abu Sufyan was returning to Mecca with his army, they also returned to Medina. Abu Sufyan returned to Mecca with the decision not to fight. After this, peace could have prevailed between the Quraysh and the Muslims. But due to the conspiracy of some Jews, that was not possible to understand the reason for this conspiracy. We have to go back to the time of the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. After the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, migrated to Medina, the Muslims of Medina were known as Muhajirin and Ansar. The Muslims who migrated from Mecca with the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, were known as Muhajirin. And the Muslims living in Medina who did not invite the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and his companions to live with them were known as Ansar, that is, helpers. In addition, there was another group among the Muslims known as Munafiqun. The hypocrites were the inhabitants of Medina and were the common and natural tendency of the time. They accepted Islam in order to keep up with it, but in reality, they did not truly believe in Allah and His Messenger. These were the treacherous group who deserted the messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, during the Battle of Uhud, and their leader was Abdullah bin Ubay bin Sul. This man enjoyed a respectable position in Medina. He felt that his position would be undermined by the advent of Islam. So he and his group tried to obstruct the messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, whenever they got the opportunity. But they never openly opposed Islam and the Prophet. Especially when they met during a war, they tried to weaken the Muslim army in various ways. The Jews were a significant number among the population of Medina. They were mainly merchants divided into three groups: the Anika, the Bani Nadir, and the Bani Qurayza. On the eve of the migration of the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, to Medina, the Jews accepted him without hesitation and did not consider the arrival of the new faith as a threat to them. Each of their tribes entered into a treaty with the messenger, which can be called a treaty of friendship or non-aggression pact. One of the clauses of this treaty was that if one party was attacked, the other party would not help its enemy under any circumstances. During the life of the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, that is, when he was in Mecca, only the verses of the Quran on religious and spiritual matters were revealed. As a result, the characteristics of Islam at that time were limited. Islam began to gain momentum in the religious and spiritual matters that determined the relationship between the Creator and the creation when the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, migrated to Medina. It also penetrated other aspects of human life, including the social, political, and economic spheres. Islam considers man as an active member of society and presents the idea of building society as a place where people can live a beautiful, dynamic, and prosperous life. This dynamic thinking of Islam naturally creates conflicts with the prevailing lifestyle and beliefs. The first conflict between religions began with Judaism. After the victory of the Muslims in the Battle of Badr, the Jews began to be aware of their position. Then the merchant Anika broke the terms of the treaty and openly opposed the Muslims. The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, suppressed them with a harsh hand, and they were forced to surrender. As a punishment for breaking the treaty, they were expelled from Medina and went to Syria. After many days of fighting, the next Jewish tribe, the Banu Nazir, broke their treaty and the Muslims suppressed them in the same way. Some of this tribe went to Syria, and some started living in the Khaybar area north of Medina. The role of the leader of the treacherous party, Abdullah bin Ubay, during the conflict with these two Jewish tribes was very mysterious. He first sided with the Jews and secretly encouraged them to engage in conflict with the Muslims and promised them active cooperation. But later, when the tide of war turned in favor of the Muslims, the third Jewish tribe, the Banu Qurayza, broke their promise and abandoned the Jews. They continued to live peacefully in Medina. Their relations with the Muslims were normal and peaceful, and they continued to fulfill the terms of the treaty properly. But they were expelled from Medina and lived in the Khaybar area. The Banu Nazir tribe that was there could not forget their defeat and punishment by the Muslims. After many battles, they learned that the next year the Muslims, the Quraysh army, was committed to another 1 o'clock war. They also waited for the time, in the hope that the Muslims would be destroyed in the war. But when the war did not take place at the scheduled time in the next year, they decided to attack the Muslims directly themselves. By the end of the summer of 626 AD, a delegation of Jews living in Khaybar started their journey to Mecca. The delegation was led by Huyai bin Akhtab, the leader of the Banu Nadir tribe in Medina. When they reached Mecca, they met with Abu Sufyan and proposed an expedition against the Muslims. Akhtab tried to exploit the fears and emotions of the Quraysh by raising the issue of the potential danger posed by the spread of Islam. He reminded Abu Sufyan that if the Muslims reached Yamama, the Quraysh's trade routes to Iraq and Bahrain would be completely cut off. Abu Sufyan asked, "Son of Akhtab, you are one of the wise men. Tell me, in your opinion, is Muhammad's new religion better than ours?" He answered without hesitation, "I can assure you that your religion is better than Muhammad's religion. You are on the right path." In response, you were very happy and agreed to fight Muhammad, although other Arab tribes joined them. But then the Jewish delegation defeated the Ghatafan and Bani Asad tribes. And similar talks took place, and they also agreed to the proposal of the delegation. They all together conducted an all-out campaign with all the other tribes. They decided to destroy the Muslims forever. After the Battle of Ajnadayn, the Quraysh were forced to admit their trade deficit with Syria. Since the Muslims were in the hands of the Muslims, it was not possible for the Meccans to use the coastal route to Syria. Therefore, the Meccans tried to more or less fill the gap caused by the cessation of trade with Syria by increasing trade with Iraq, Bahrain, and Yemen, meeting with the Jewish delegation. As a result, Abu Sufyan became more cautious about the future of the trade of the Meccans. When the Muslims reached Yamama, the routes to Iraq and Bahrain would also be closed for the Quraysh. As a result, their trade would be limited. This possible contraction of trade with Yemen alone would be a serious economic blow to the Quraysh, the effects of which they would not be able to overcome. Moreover, Abu Sufyan had to be reprimanded by Safwan bin Umayyah for not confronting the Muslims in the previous campaign. For these reasons, Abu Sufyan decided to launch another campaign against the Muslims. Preparations for the campaign began. In early February 6, 27 AD, the warriors of the various tribes began to gather. The Quraysh assembled the largest force, consisting of 400 warriors, 300 divisions, and 1,500 camels. The Ghatafan tribe, led by Uyayna bin Hisn, assembled the second largest. Their number of warriors was 2,000. In addition, the Banu Sulaim tribe, 700, and the Banu Asad led by Dalaya bin Goel brought an unknown number of warriors. Quraysh and other smaller tribes gathered in Mecca, and the Ghatafan, Banu Asad, and Banu Sulaim gathered in the north, northeast, and east of Medina, respectively. From this gathering area, they began to prepare for the journey to Medina, including the smaller tribes, the number of whom is not mentioned. The total number of soldiers amounted to 10,000. Abu Sufyan took the lead in this campaign, and we can call this army, which was composed of various tribes, the Allied Army. On Tuesday, February 24, 627 AD, the Allied army advanced from their various gathering areas and set up camp in the vicinity of Medina. The Quraysh camped on the west side of Mount Uhud, where they had camped during many battles. To their north was the forest, and next to it was the junction of springs. The Ghatafan and other tribes were 2 miles south of Mount Bahut. They set up camp at a place called Nak-Ma, and when the camp was completed, the Nitya army moved towards Medina. This news reached Medina at the initial stage of the gathering of Quraysh and their allies in Mecca. As news of the joining of various tribes with the poor continued to arrive, it gradually took on a worrying form. In the latest news, the messenger, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, learned that he was determined to reassure the Muslims. A large army of 10,000 warriors had started their journey towards Medina. This news caused anxiety and despair among the Muslims. Of course, the Muslims had always fought against opponents who were several times more numerous. In the battles of Badr and Uhud, the enemy army was 3 and 4 times more numerous than them respectively. Although the number of capable Muslims in Medina was currently 3,000, the number of hypocrites among them was a few hundred. On the other hand, the gathering of 10,000 soldiers was undoubtedly a huge matter. Never in the history of the Hijaz has such a large army been assembled in any battle. It appeared as a beacon of light amidst the anxiety and despair of the Muslims. 1,200 Flute Salman, may Allah be pleased with him, also gave some advice. He said that the Persian army, as a preventive measure to protect themselves from the attack of a larger enemy, used the technique of digging wide and deep trenches in the enemy's approach as if the enemy were attacking. They could not pass that test, and this strategy was completely unknown, but they understood its importance and accepted the proposal with all their hearts. The messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, ordered the digging of a trench. Many who were unable to understand the importance of this innovative strategy did not agree to devote themselves to such a difficult task as digging a trench. And the hypocrites naturally tried to stay away from this hard work and tried to keep others away from it. But what if the messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, personally dedicated himself to digging a trench? It was not possible for any self-respecting Muslim to stay away. After calculating the length of the planned test, a group of 10 Muslims was given the responsibility of digging 40 trenches. The Muslims were engaged in sweaty and bone-crushing labor. Aswaz bin Thabit, may Allah be pleased with him, was trying to keep everyone energized by reciting his poems. He could compose poems so beautiful on instantly present subjects that it was hard to believe. His poems could instantly move the listener emotionally. The test range was from Sheikh Ain to the Jawab Mountain, and from there to Jabal Bani and Bed. These mountains were protected by the test. Within the area was the area west of the mountain range known as Jabal Bani and Bed. That is, the western arm of the test was extended to the south to protect the left flank of the Muslim army. The area east of Sain and southwest of Jabal Bani and Bed is a red-tinged field. The surface of this field is also flat and filled with large black borders. As a result, military operations are not possible through these areas. To the south of the test center is Shila Pahar. The mountain is 400 feet high, 1 mile long, and slightly less wide. The mountain is long in the north and south, but has steep parts. On all sides, small Jubba hills are located near the steep part of the northeast side of the rock. When the trenches were completed, the Muslim army set up their camp in front of Shila Pahar. Their total number was 3,000. Among them were the hypocrites who were not sure of fighting to the end. The plan of the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was to leave the greater part of his army undeployed so that the enemy could pass through any part of the test and strike quickly. To prevent such a surprise attack by the enemy, 200 warriors were deployed to guard the entire test. They took up positions in the high hilly areas surrounding the test as pickets. A mobile force of 500 men was appointed. They were tasked with patrolling various important establishments in Medina. They were also tasked with keeping an eye on areas that could not be protected by the test to prevent any intruders. At that time, the city of Medina consisted of some establishments and forts, and the center of the city was the Prophet's mosque. The battlefield was facing north and northwest from Medina. Women and children were kept in forts and houses located far from the battlefield. It was winter. It was very heavy compared to other times, and that too. When the fog reached the test for a long time, they were completely shocked to see it. The strength with which they had come here to fight was certain of victory. Of course, Allah set out on a war journey with great joy and anticipation of victory. But on the way, an obstacle arose. This experiment, as the astonished Abu Sufyan said, was not an Arab invention. In the minds of ordinary Arabs who believed in the religion of heroism, such a war strategy had no place. However, the Allied forces advanced and deployed troops along the northwestern side of the pass. Those who besieged the area for 23 long days would come near the pass during the day and exchange fire. And at night, the Muslim army would return to camp and deploy only 200 fighters to guard the pass itself. Usually during the day and sometimes at night, the Allied forces were busy searching for a suitable place to pass the pass. So they accidentally found such a place after a few days. However, the first 10 days of the siege passed without any decision on the part of either side. The morale of both forces was very stressed by the situation. However, they were determined to confront each other in any situation. The Muslims began to feel the pangs of hunger. The food reserves in Medina were not very 1 o'clock. As a result, the supply of rations to the Muslim army was reduced by half. It was at this opportunity that the hypocrites began to openly oppose the messenger and criticize him. During the trial, the messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, assured the Muslims that within a few years the Roman and Persian empires would be destroyed and their vast wealth would be in the hands of willing Muslims. When the hypocrites began to say that Muhammad had promised to make us possess the wealth of Caesar, yet today he is unable to save us from this small problem, the true believers remained steadfast in their faith and loyalty to their leader. The deterioration of the situation also caused discontent among the Allied soldiers. The Arabs were accustomed to achieving quick results through war rather than a prolonged siege. Many of the Allied soldiers fell ill due to the bad weather. Since they did not plan for such a long stay, they were in a state of food shortage. However, since they were not themselves besieged, they began to collect food from the surrounding areas. Abu Sufyan began to think hard about finding a way out. He met with the Jewish leader Huway, and they were able to formulate a promising new plan. On the night of Friday, March 7th, Huway secretly entered the camp of the Bani Qurayza tribe and sought a meeting with the leader of the tribe, Ka'b bin Ashraf. He initially refused to meet with the prisoner, assuming the purpose of his visit. But after Huway's repeated requests, he finally agreed. The two then took advantage of the opportunity and, with great coolness and intelligence, deserted the Jews and their followers to the side of the Muslims. He tried to persuade him to join the army. At first, Jayan denied the matter and said that Muhammad was complying with all the terms of his agreement with us, and we have no complaints against him. He also told why. Besides, there is no guarantee that you will win the war. I either agree to your proposal, but if the expedition fails, how will I bear the pressure of Muhammad if you return to Mecca? He wanted to avoid white in this way, but either way, sometimes threats, sometimes temptations, and sometimes begging for help continued to create pressure and finally managed to bring Cap to an agreement with the Allies. According to the terms of their agreement, the Allies and the Bani Qurayza would attack together from two directions. The Bani Qurayza camp was 2 miles southeast of Medina. From there, they would attack the Muslim army from the rear and attract some Muslims to their side. And on this occasion, the Allied forces would launch a fierce attack from the front. The Bani Qurayza asked for 10 days to prepare, and it was decided that during these 10 days the Quraysh would carry out small operations to keep the Muslim forces busy. Thus, the last group of Jews in Medina also broke their treaty with the Muslims, not the previous ones. But did they know how much compensation they would have to pay for this? The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was convinced of this agreement. Later, he sent a spy to the Quraysh camp one night. He heard some talk about this agreement, and after some time, rumors about it began to spread. Finally, from an incident between Safiya, may Allah be pleased with her, and a Jew, the Muslims were convinced of the truth of the agreement. Safiya, may Allah be pleased with her, was the maternal aunt of the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. She, along with other women and children, took refuge in a small fort to the southeast of Medina. Among those present in the fort, the poet Asr was one of them. He was the only man who was staying there. One day Safiya, may Allah be pleased with her, saw from the top of the fort that an armed Jew was secretly looking for a way past the walls of the fort. Safiya, may Allah be pleased with her, immediately realized that she was a scout, and she had come to collect information for their attack plan. At the time of the attack on the unprotected rear of the Muslim army, the Jew would be the one to show the way to the Banu Qurayza. Safiya's Allah quickly ran to the poet Hassan and told him that Hassan was a Jew who was secretly searching for a way. Perhaps this is the way the merchant king would take. As for the attack from the rear, you know that the Messenger of Allah is busy in the battlefield, and it is not possible for him to remove some soldiers and send them to protect us. This Jew must be killed. Go and kill him now. The poet replied, O daughter of Muttalib, may Allah's mercy be upon you. You know that such a thing is not possible for me. Upon receiving such an answer from a man, Safiya, may Allah be pleased with her, took up her weapon and put on her belt. This incredibly brave woman came down from the fort to confront the Jew and was able to kill the Jewish spy. She returned to the fort and said to Hassan, O Hassan, go now, take the clothes and belongings from the body of the dead body. I, being a woman, cannot touch the clothes worn by a man anymore. Hassan replied, O daughter of Abdul Muttalib, may Allah's mercy be upon you. I have no need of all these things. After this news reached the Muslims, there was no doubt in their minds about the treachery of the Banu Qurayza. The situation became more tense and the hypocrites became more vocal. By this time, the Muslims' food supply had been reduced by half and then almost to zero. Despite this, their morale was unwavering. But if the siege had been prolonged, the Muslims might have succumbed to hunger, and they had no military solution to this problem. Since the results of military measures were delayed, the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, decided to take diplomatic action considering the situation. He secretly contacted the commander of the Ghatafan section of the enemy, Waynar. Wayne was also very brave, but simple-minded. His intelligence was somewhat less than his strength. The purpose of this communication was to draw the Ghatafan tribe away from the siege and separate them from the Allied army. If he could do that, maybe the other tribes would abandon their men. And if he did not do that, even if at least 2,000 warriors of the Ghatafan tribe left, the Allied army would be so weak that it would be possible for the Muslims to force them to leave Medina through war. The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, sent a proposal to Ghatafan that if they left the Allied army and returned home, they would be given 1/3 of the dates produced in Medina. Wayne did not accept this proposal, because he was already in the process of winning the war. The Muslims decided to inform some leading Muslims about the matter before signing the agreement. He strongly opposed the agreement and said in an astonished voice, "This infidel will receive nothing from us except the blow of the sword." The opposition to this treaty among the Muslims was so great that the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, had to abandon the idea. The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, understood the gravity of the war situation and the importance of diplomatic action, but the sincere and courageous Muslims did not understand it as much as he did. He knew that there was only one way to escape from this prolonged siege, and that was to weaken the Allied forces through diplomatic action. He kept looking for an opportunity and soon found it. A member of the Ghatafan tribe named Nuaym bin Mas'ud embraced Islam, and he kept it a secret. The three main forces of the Allied army. At that time, he was known as an influential nobleman among the Banu Qurayza. He was indeed a capable person. One day, Nuaym escaped from the tent of Ghatafan and appeared before the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and expressed his desire to serve Islam, and said, "You can send me wherever you want." The Messenger of Allah was praying for such an opportunity. He sat down with Nuaym and after a detailed discussion explained to him what to do. A member of the Ghatafan tribe named Nuaym bin Mas'ud converted to Islam and kept it a secret from all the three main forces of the Allied army, namely the Quraysh, Ghatafan, and Banu Qurayza. He was known as an influential nobleman. One night, Nuaym escaped from the tent of Ghatafan and appeared before the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and expressed his desire to serve Islam, and said, "You can send me wherever you want." The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was praying for such an opportunity. He sat down with Naim and after a detailed discussion, explained to him what to do. That same night, Naim went to the camp of Banu Qurayza and met their chief Qabi. He analyzed the dangerous aspects of the situation and said, "Your situation is not like that of Quraysh and Ghatafan. Your homes and families are here near Medina, and their homes are a safe distance from Medina. They are not at great risk in this war in Mecca, because if they fail to defeat the Muslim army, they will return to Mecca, and they will throw you into the well of the Muslims. So do not take part in this war until you give some members of their noble and leading families as hostages. This will not be right. You can trust them only if you get hostages." Naim then went to the Quraysh camp. Abu Sufyan met him. He knew him well from the past and respected his wisdom. He said to Abu Sufyan, "You have made a treaty with a man who is treacherous and unreliable. I have learned from reliable sources in Medina that the people of Bani Qurayza have regretted this treaty and have entered into a new treaty with Muhammad. They will soon demand hostages from you and hand them over to Muhammad to instill confidence in him. Then the Jews will openly join Muhammad and jointly attack us under any circumstances. It would not be right for you to send hostages to the Jews." Naim also presented the same picture after meeting Ghatafan. Within a short time, suspicion and misunderstanding began to arise among the allies. Abu Sufyan believed the Jews without hesitation, but after meeting Nuaym, he began to suffer from uncertainty. He decided to accelerate the war and informed the Jews of this decision to test them. On the night after meeting Nuaym, that is, on Friday, March 14th, he sent a delegation led by Ikrama to whom Ikrama went to their camp and proposed that the situation had become very dangerous. It was not possible to delay any longer. "We want to attack tomorrow. According to the agreement, you also attack Muhammad from your position at the same time." The Jews first hesitated and finally presented the condition, saying, "Our situation is much more delicate than yours. If you cannot benefit from the war, you will return to Mecca. And in order to avoid this from happening, you will send some members of your noble families to us as hostages. They will remain here until the successful conclusion of the war. Moreover, tomorrow is Saturday. Fighting on Saturday is forbidden for the Jews. Those who disobey this prohibition will be turned into pigs and monkeys by God." After receiving such an answer from the Jews, Ikrama returned empty-handed. Abu Sufyan took another initiative to convince the Jews to join the war tomorrow and sent another delegation to the club. The Quraysh group said that no hostages will be given. "You will definitely participate in the war tomorrow." The Jews said that Saturday is not a war. Moreover, hostages must be given before the war. After this experience, the allies, both the Jews thought that Naim, he had said the right thing. how good he had not signed for us. And through this incident, on the night of the 9th, Allah Ta'ala Anhu was able to separate the Bani Qurayza from the allies with great skill. Meanwhile, Khalid and Ikramah got tired of waiting. Seeing no possibility of a coordinated final blow by the allies, they took the decision into their own hands. Saturday, March 15th, they advanced with their cavalry and took up position to the west of Jawab. The area was somewhat narrow, which could be crossed from Ashoka Prabhupada or Padma Yoga. The place was in front of the Muslim camp and at the foot of the rocky hill. My cavalry group advanced first, and a small part managed to pass the test by jumping. Their number was 7, including Ikram. Among them was a huge man who advanced ahead with his huge horse and began to survey the position of the Muslims. The Muslims were surprised by the sudden intrusion of the Quraysh. Hand-to-hand combat began. This duel is very famous in history and is described in detail. The huge man was very tall and fat. When he stood, he seemed like an impenetrable wall. His horse was also huge. When he sat on this horse, he seemed to be something truly unreal. 1 o'clock, this man, huge, strong, and fearless, had a terrifying face. His presence reassured his companions as well as terrified the enemies. This man's name was Amr bin Ah. We will refer to him as the giant in the following section. He, however, stared at the Muslims with contempt from behind. The giant suddenly raised his head and roared. He said, "I am Amr bin Abi Wad. I am the greatest warrior of Arabia. I am undefeated." He thought of himself as such and said in a very loud voice, "Is there anyone among you who wants to fight me?" The Muslims silently accepted his challenge and looked at each other. They also looked at the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, but no one responded. Because the giant was very well known for his strength and skill, he has never been defeated in a battle by a giant and has not given way to any of his opponents. It is said that he alone is equal to 500 cavalrymen. It is also said that he can lift a live horse and throw it to the ground, and he can lift a calf in his left hand and use it as a shield during battle. There were many other such stories about him. In fact, the keen imagination of the Arabs created many stories about his overwhelming strength. Seeing the silence of the Muslims, the duty also laughed contemptuously and joined his laughter by standing on the other side of the test. They stood nearby on the other side of the test and could see everything and hear it. The giant said, "Then there is no one among you who has manhood. Then what will happen to your Islam? And what will happen to the Prophet?" Hearing the demon's sarcastic words, Hazrat Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, stepped forward and prayed to the Prophet to silence his disobedient tongue forever. The Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, sat down, and Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, was forced to return to his own position. The demon laughed again with a sharp, sarcastic smile and challenged Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, to ask for permission from the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. But this time he asked him to refrain. Amr, may Allah be pleased with him, laughed even more sarcastically. He rebuked him in sharp language and said, "Where is your paradise? Do you believe that those who are killed in battle go to paradise? Yet today he is not able to send a single person before me." When Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, asked for permission for the 3rd time, the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, understood from the look in his eyes that it was not possible to stop Ali. He looked at Ali with deep affection. He had no one so dear to him as Ali. He took off his turban and put it on Ali's head. Then he took off his sword and tied it around Ali's waist. And he prayed, "O Allah, help Ali." The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, gave Ali the sword. It was said that after a disbeliever named Ibn Hajjaj was killed in the Battle of Badr, his sword came into the hands of the Muslims. And the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, himself used it. This sword, which fell into the hands of Ali, occupied a special place in the history of Islam. And this sword, known as Zulfiqar, Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, quickly advanced towards the infidels with a few Muslims. The small group stood in front of the giant TV, and Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, took a few more steps and came within reach of both of them. The giant was a friend of Hazrat Ali's father Abu Talib, so he knew Ali well and looked at Ali and smiled in such a keeper's manner. The way an old man would say to a boy, "Oh my son, Ali, Allah, please accept at least one of them." Everyone knows that if someone makes you 2 offers, You should accept at least one of them." The giant replied, "Yes, this is true." Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, said, "Then I have two offers for you. The first is that you accept Allah and His Messenger and Islam." The giant replied, "I have no need of them." A lyra was given. Allahu then said, "Then get down from the horse and face me." The demon said, "Why? Nephew, I have no desire to kill you." Ali said, "Take the body, but my desire to kill you is very strong." Hearing this from Hazrat Ali's mouth, the two faces turned blue with anger. With a loud scream, he jumped down from the house. His agility surprised even the demon. He unsheathed his sword and ran towards Ali. The battle began. The demon struck Ali many times, but Ali's Allah Ta'ala Anhu remained unharmed. He successfully repelled each of his blows. As a result, the demon retreated a little and started gasping in surprise. He wondered in amazement. How is this possible? Never before had any enemy been able to survive with him for so long. Yet this boy was now looking at him as if he had come to play with him. When the giant was thinking about this, suddenly such a 1 o'clock incident happened, which no one can understand immediately, not even himself. Ali's Allah Ta'ala Anhu did what he did. He threw away his sword and shield, jumped into the air and kicked both of them in the chest, and grabbed his throat with both hands. Unable to handle the giant's rhythm, he fell down and Ali's Allah Ta'ala Anhu sat on his chest. The whole incident happened in an instant. Both the parties present held their breath and watched the incident. In a short time, the demon disappeared from the face and was removed, but anger was instead aroused there. It is true that he was defeated by a young man, but he was not yet exhausted. If he wanted, he could blow his opponent into the air with a flick of his finger, just like a dry leaf can be blown away. The eyes of the machine turned blue and the diseases in his throat became tense. He tried to free himself from the pressure of Ali's hand with the help of his huge force, but he failed. The muscles in Hazrat Ali's arms were as strong as steel. Hazrat Ali sat on the demon's chest and took out a sharp knife from his waist. He took it close to his throat and said in a calm voice, "Listen, O Amr, victory or defeat is determined by the will of Allah. If you accept Islam, then not only will you be saved, but you will spend the rest of your days in this world and the hereafter in peace." It was impossible for both of them to accept Hazrat Ali's offer. How could he, considered the greatest warrior in the whole of Arabia, live the rest of his life with the shame of defeat and dishonor? Could it ever be that he was not surrendering to his opponent after being defeated? This could not be. "I will take my sword with me if I survive." Thinking all this on the floor of your house, he gathered spit in his mouth and threw it forcefully in Hazrat Ali's face. And while doing this, he was certain of his fate. He knew that in a moment Ali's raised sharp knife would be at his throat, and the last breath will make way for the book to come out. I was very brave and could accept death without hesitation. He raised his chin and stretched his neck towards Ali. He thought that Ali would stab him right now. Of course, what else could he think of? But the next incident made him even more angry. Ali's Allah Ta'ala Anhu slowly got up from his chest, wiped his face, stood a few steps back and looked calmly at his opponent and said, "No, O Amr, I do not kill anyone out of personal anger except for the purpose of Allah. Since you are spitting in my face, killing you now will be a form of personal revenge. Therefore, I beg you to get up and go to your companions." The demon stood up, but he was not ready to return to his companions in a defeated state. If he was alive, he would be victorious or not. As a last resort, he picked up his sword and quickly ran towards Ali. Perhaps he wanted to hit Ali while he was not careful, but the matter did not escape Ali's attention. Ali quickly raised his sword and shield and prepared to attack again. The demon struck Ali with all his might, mortally wounding him, and if the blow had not lost its intensity from the collision with the shield, it would have caused irreparable damage. Before the demon could raise his sword again, Zulfikar was scorched by the sunlight, and its tip instantly cut the demon's throat, causing blood to flow from his throat like a torrent. Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, was slightly injured. He stood still for a while. Then he started staggering like a drunkard and eventually fell face down and died. The earth is very vast, so perhaps the demon did not tremble in his fall. But the sound of Allahu Akbar that was heard from the mouths of 2,000 Muslims at his fall shook the surrounding Rocky Mountains. This unheard-of takbir-doni began to echo loudly in the air around the Arabian Valley before it merged into the heart of the desert. The Muslims now rushed towards the remaining 6 Quraysh. When the clash began, the Quraysh quickly fled and passed the test in one fell swoop, throwing stones at Vikram Mahid. Khalid's cousin Nawfal bin Abdullah fell into the test while crossing. When the Muslims kept throwing stones at him, he was hit and begged, "Are you Arabs? Death is better than this." Then Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, went to the test and killed him. The Muslims returned to the camp and a strong guard was posted at the test site. The next afternoon, Khalid advanced with his cavalry. He wanted to succeed where Ikrama had failed. He tried to pass the test, but the Muslim army was very alert. A lot of arrows were exchanged and one person was killed on both sides. But Khalid failed to pass the test. Seeing the intensity of the Muslim resistance, Khalid decided to adopt a different strategy. He returned with his army and moved away from the test. He tried to give the impression that he had given up the desire to fight. Seeing Khalid's return, the Muslims withdrew from their positions and began to rest. Taking this opportunity, Khalid attacked suddenly, and before the Muslims could create a barrier, some Quraysh under his leadership were able to pass the test. But they did not advance far. The Muslims organized themselves and created a barrier. After some hand-to-hand fighting, one Muslim was killed by Khalid. Seeing the intensity of the Muslim resistance, Khalid decided to withdraw his attack. This was the last major clash of the Battle of Ajnadayn. The next 2 days passed without any incident except for 2 or 3 shots. There was a severe shortage of food among the Muslims. However, their morale increased further as they were able to repel the enemy's attack. Despite the severity of hunger, they remained steadfast in their decision to confront the infidels. On the other hand, discontent was growing among the Allied forces and their morale was weakening. Everyone realized that their campaign, which they had hoped to win, had ended in failure. Moreover, no one could find a way out of this deadlock. On the night of Tuesday, March 18th, the Allied army was destroyed by a severe storm and cold wave. It started to get very cold. The Allied camp was more dilapidated than the Muslim camp. They sat in a heap wrapped in blankets and robes. They waited until the storm was over. Abu Sufyan could not bear it any longer and stood on his tiptoes and shouted in a loud voice that it was not possible to stay here under any circumstances. People and other animals have to endure endless suffering under the open sky. Bani Qurayza has betrayed us at the moment of need. The camp has been destroyed by the storm. Let us return to Mecca. I will go. Having said these words, Abu Sufyan mounted his camel and quickly left the camp with his companions. When the Ghatafan and other tribes learned that the Quraysh had left the camp, they did not delay, and Khalid and Amr ibn al-Ajay with their cavalry followed the Quraysh army. If the Muslims pursued them from behind, the responsibility of repelling them was on them. The grief of failure weighed heavily on Abu Sufyan's heart. He returned to Mecca with a broken heart. The next morning, the Muslims found that the Allied army had broken camp and returned to Mecca. This was the last step of the Quraysh to wipe the Muslims off the face of the earth. From then on, instead of thinking of attacking, they adopted a defensive approach. The Battle of the Trench ended here, with 4 people killed on each side. The Muslims were victorious in this battle. They were able to protect their home city of Medina from the enemy forces. On the other hand, the Allies, with the aim of annihilating the Muslims, completely failed. They failed to cause even a little harm to the Muslims. The 23-day siege created terrible mental stress on both sides. The siege ended in a storm. But the storm was not the reason for the withdrawal, but was just an opportunity. In fact, it is better to call it a siege rather than a war, because there was no significant clash between the two forces. This is the first time in the history of Islam that diplomacy was resorted to on the battlefield, and how war and diplomatic activities help in achieving the goal is also evident here. So that if the political failure to achieve the goal is achieved, the armed forces are used, and the use of armed forces is one aspect of war, and that is the destructive aspect. If armed conflict becomes inevitable, the enemy is weakened and friendless through diplomatic activities to ensure victory. The army was led by the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and that is what he did. He also divided the number of the enemy in his mind through diplomatic activities. Most Muslims did not understand this strategy of the Messenger of Allah at first. Later, They learned from their leader. They understood that war is a strategy. This statement of the Messenger of Allah was repeatedly remembered in subsequent Muslim campaigns. Really, viewers, after knowing what happened next, we will have to watch our next episode.